Hi, everybody.
So I first wanted to ask you, how did you come to the work that you do?
Yeah. Well, I started off as an artist when I was 19 and was immediately drawn into a contemplation of the creative practice because I noticed that the work that I made as an artist was, in a way, a direct projection or a reflection of my inner state, my thought state. And my anxieties, my tensions, my intuitions. So I noticed that this sort of very complex inner condition was projected into the artwork, or manifest in the artwork. And I began to wonder what that means for creating society. So that was a leap that I made. And I traveled and I studied and I worked for, I don't know what it was, 15 years in various ways. And then in 2007, I met a group of people who were kind of trying to do this at a systems level through a consulting model. And we've co-founded Reos Partners. And we were 9 friends from 6 countries. We started off as a kind of micro-global organization, and all of us sort of figured it out together. And yeah, today we're working on the future of countries and working with heads of state, with the drug situation internationally, and future of greening energy in the North American grid, and also much smaller scale work with local organizations and things like that. But we are, as you said, designers and I think facilitators of creative processes with many stakeholders and participants to both think and act together systemically.
And speaking of systems, last night you said a really amazing thing that I think relates to the theme of the conference, and that was, if I paraphrase this correctly, systems don't have solutions.
Yeah.
They have implementations. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Interventions.
Interventions.
Yeah, that's right.
So my partner, Adam Kahane, wrote a book called Solving Tough Problems many years ago. And in the firm and in the community, we're always wrestling with this way of speaking about social problems, whether there are solutions. And I got to a point in this work where I realized that solutions are really worked out locally with real people with real problems. Real people engage with real problems. Real people engage with their problems and their situations. So the action part comes through relationships as not Madeline, the first speaker this morning.
That's it?
No, not
Madeline.
Madeline, yeah. Relationships. So I began to see that at a systems level, there's no solutions. What we do in Reos is we look at these systems, we take these stakeholders through a process of kind of uncovering root causes. And the root causes are in the ways people think, in the ways that we think. And so the whole society is, as Emerson wrote, as systems thinking tells us, a materialization of our moral state and of our state of thought. So if we look at child protection in Australia, or collective prosperity in Colombia, or war and peace in Guatemala in the decades ago, or whatever it is we're working on, we come to a cultural base of what people believe. And when we dig down to that, we see things like a separation of rich and poor in Colombia, different perspectives and different interests among many different people, cause and effect far apart in space and time with climate change. That's when we get into the mess, and you realize a solution is not the way to think about this. It is too messy, it is too complex, it's too alive. There's no solution to racism in South Africa and the echoes of apartheid there. Or when we worked in Oakland, we learned that slavery, which ended 150 years ago, is still cascading through the generations as psychic trauma. There's no solution for these things. What we can do is design interventions. And this is what's interesting to me, is that there's there's lots of examples of people like Eddie Rama and Antanas Mokas, who I've mentioned in my writings, who have observed the invisible causes of continued social challenge in belief systems, in ways of seeing each other, in ways of thinking. And they've designed artistic and theatrical and humorous and publicly engaging ways to actually change behavior. So this is a thesis that I'm sort of playing with, that solutions are local, solutions are real people working with their problems, and at a systems level, we can design interventions, and we'll do an exercise that I think untangles or unfolds a little bit what I mean by that.
I wanted to bring one thing up is in the work that I do with prevention of human trafficking.
Yeah.
You just gave a word back to me, is intervention, because around human trafficking, when we talk about intervention, it's actually quite ugly. It's not very successful. It fails at an 85% rate. I mean, I could go on and on and on. You know, human trafficking is a big thing that doesn't have a solution. But you, in the way that you said design interventions, like putting the two words together, really does mean that we get that word back.
Yes. There was a wonderful art exhibit at Mass Mocha, probably 5 years ago, curated by Nato Thompson. Maybe it was more than that. I'm getting old, huh? 10 years ago, probably, yeah. Called The Interventionists. It was a survey of artists around the world who are using really techniques for mindset shift, but not propaganda. And this is what Antanas Mokas said. Someone asked him, what's the difference between what you're doing and propaganda? And he said, my hands are on the table. So my motives in playing games and engaging public and in working on our collective mindsets, my motives are clear. So I use it in that sense.
Can you help us, we're not all Adams or Jeff Barnums. What is it that we can all take away about creating interventions when we see systems that need them? What can you share with us about how to go about that and how to know when you've got the right intervention?
Yeah. So I think this is where the work gets really fun. One can be completely, it's a non-starter to think of a solution for homelessness, in San Francisco, because it's resilient to any programs, any single-pointed, like that first diagram that was shown up there in the keynote this morning. Any single-pointed solution, the system is going to reject it. So then you have to think, okay, and this is what we do with our stakeholders, where can we intervene most effectively, and how can we intervene most effectively? So the guiding idea is to peel back a systemic situation from its manifestations, from when it shows up as on the surface, to its root causes in culture, and finally to own those in oneself, right? And I think when you ask how I got here, I think the work that I did in creativity and art and so on, and the reading and the studies and so forth, but part of when we get into this space with stakeholders gathered around super high stakes problems and protecting children, we know children are going to die if we don't do something, or government leaders, all the knowledge kind of flies out the window a little bit, and so you have to have presence, you have to be present. And I would encourage any designer thinking of designing interventions to understand presence, and to understand the presence of oneself and those around you, because that's the space that you begin to sculpt. And in a minute when we do the exercise, I want to get more specific about that, because what the interventionists are successfully doing is sort of sculpting that invisible space of presence and shining attention or calling attention to what, when we ignore it, criminality comes in. Right? So if we behave agnostically to each other, then there's not attention there, and criminality can come in. And by shining attention, we call attention, and people begin to behave differently. I know that's a bit abstract, but it is this intangible presence that is the first thing. It's the relationship. It's the first point of entry. And from there, within that skin or within that substance and that realization, design can begin.
I think that's right. I was just going to bring up the point is, I use a little bit of a different vocabulary, but we're saying the same things because we always talk about our shadow selves, and there's parts of us that we don't accept. And when we don't accept it and we just want to deny it and ignore it, it actually becomes a bigger problem in our societies.
Right.
And that's where you're seeing these bigger social issues become even
Yes.
bigger.
Yes.
So what you're talking about is exactly like we have to own it, we have to accept it, we have to bring it in. And when we really sit with it, then that's when the work can be done.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. So I want to do a little exercise.
please, take us through.
Because we're all present here.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, good.
exactly.
And how are we doing on time?
We're doing fine.
We're great.
That's cool. Great is good enough.
You don't see the ball anywhere?
No.
No, the ball's not around. All right. So, so there's a little bit of context here. I wrote an article in 2010 about this idea of social sculpture, allowing society to heal itself or enabling society to regenerate. And I want to give you a little metaphor in terms of context. If I cut myself, I need a Band-Aid, a bandage. That's my solution. It's a solution, okay? It's a good solution. Stops the bleeding, prevents infection. But then I have to, I forget about it, but actually this wonderful thing happens where my body restores itself. This is a challenge for social health. We have to understand society as an organism that's not healthy, right? And we don't need to design for utopias. We don't need to work for utopias, but we need to understand what a healthy society might look like. Now, this is a hard thing because we're used to thinking about society, as someone else, as Terry pointed out, in rather linear worldviews and worldview ways. But we need a more sophisticated, more grounded way of thinking about society. And I don't have a solution there, but I have a provocation, an exercise. So, this exercise has 4 observations, and just do them in yourself as I list them. This is just a thought exercise, very light.
Should we close our eyes? Or?
Yeah, just close your eyes or think how you want to, but I'm going to ask you to do a 4-part thought exercise. And I want to talk about what comes up.
Okay.
So the first one is things we do and make to meet our physical needs. This is food, water, clothing, warmth, transportation. Think of all that you do in your life, from earning money to pay your rent, to putting on your clothes in the morning, and shopping, and taking care of your physical needs. And think of all that we do in society to take care of our physical needs. This is important. This is part of life. Okay. Second, intellectual activity. Think of something that you've heard today, or a book that you've read, or an article, or a book review that gave an idea to you that you've been chewing about. You've been thinking about it, chewing on it. Oh, man, that's a really chewy idea. I really like that. That's another inner experience. Okay? Third, think of a time when you were drawn completely outside your own personal needs and concerns and completely outside your rational intellectual thinking, and you were struck with wonder and awe. And this could be you were noticing the intricate geometry of a flower, or standing in front of a masterpiece work of art, or hearing Bach or something. I don't know what it is for you. Or it could be that you've suffered so intensively that you finally realize something about life. This is the contemplation of a profound truth. These are 3 different, in a way, everyday states, inner conditions. And we systematically take our stakeholders through kind of a ladder here of when they come in, they're thinking about their interests and their space in the system and their personal needs. And we help them in the second space surface those, but see the whole picture and think together. And they're intellectually, rationally creating a basis, moving a little bit away from just my own interest to a shared basis. And on that basis, we can uncover some profound truths about what's happening and what's needed. Fourth observation, I want you to just notice who notices. Notice the observer, yourself. There's a witness or a self that, yeah, okay, I put on my socks. Oh, this really cool idea. Oh, that Rembrandt, or whatever it was that I saw, or my own learning. So there's four distinct, and there's probably many, this is a spectrum of inner experiences that are very exact in a way. This is common to every single human being, right? And my proposal is that we don't really know as a society in our education and our schooling how to cultivate these abilities to see differently and to think differently. We mash it all together completely unconsciously. You know, we're moved, and then we go back to our, like, I gotta get some coffee, and then we're gonna think about a movie, and we just go, especially in the age of digital media, we're just like a mess. But when we slow down and go offline, as Tiffany mentioned, we can begin to cultivate the latent capacities for observing, perceiving, and finally sculpting this social space. And what a good intervention does, I think, sort of my operating thesis these days, and Sarah and some others and I are going to be working on this, I hope, in the next year, is an intervention will first observe and call out and call upon and invite the who, the fourth one, the who observes, right? And we'll do that with a profound idea, with something that really moves, the third space. And then we'll do it in such a way that it can be thought about and it can be rationalized, it can be chewy. And all these then land in behavior change, in a reframing and a rethinking of, you know, maybe, as in Marcus's case, I don't want to drive so fast. I want to be careful of the pedestrians on the sidewalk.
Great.
That's beautiful.
That's great.
I'm struck by, you know, how Eve started the conference off this morning, talking about when who you are is aligned with what you do. And when you were describing these four ways of seeing and being in the world, you know, the first thing that occurred to me was, well, they're all interconnected. You know, they are messed up, but some of that is intentional. I mean, I think that I can't count myself lucky that I have a job that is wonder for me and does connect. So
That's right.
Is that the good side of this, when they are connected in a healthy, self-supporting way, or is that still problematic?
Well, this is a spectrum. These aren't buckets. This is a spectrum like a rainbow. So you can focus on the yellow and see the yellow, but in reality it all blends together, the yellow and the orange and the green. I'm not saying anything's good or bad, but what's missing is a kind of facility and a language to begin to design and think about our money systems and our rights systems, just to pick a couple of examples, but even our physical ability systems, with a broader spectrum of the human being in mind, to realize that education, money, laws have at their core the flowering of the human spirit, or however you think about it. And we don't really know what that is until we know it in ourselves. And this kind of potentization of this form of observation in a social system or a society designer, really, because we are creating a new society, gives us the perception that we need to design in that space. If I never have any time and have never cultivated a sense for the lawfulness of nature or music or art, then I don't know that lawfulness in my own design work. I don't know what's trying to aspire when someone's trying to heal from mental illness. I can't see it. I can't observe it. I can study the brain. That may be helpful. But we don't study the brains when we're working on the future of the drug war with presidents. We have to see and ask questions and provoke thoughtful inner responses. So I'm bringing this to the table not because it's new or because no one else has thought about it, but it's kind of a call for exploration and an application of a more subtle and differentiated attention to these realms that we normally just take advantage of or use but don't really work with.
So in human trafficking, when someone's trying to heal from it, the one thing that when you start to talk to these people, you hear the same thing come up and again and again. And so it really...
What's that?
Is that there's a certain place inside of them that they kept for themselves. So as they were being, whether they were sex trafficked or it was labor, indentured, servitude, their worlds would get quite small, but there's always a place inside of them that they kept for themselves. And what was beautiful is that that's where you can start, like you're talking about the healing and what that looks like, what you can sculpt, what you can bring out and make it become more of that person be more integrated and healthy again, that's the place to start.
And I would just say and suggest, my own experience and my own hunch is that this is the space that ancient people lived within instinctively. And
this was the norm.
Yeah.
We've traded it for a really hyper-individuality, which is a good thing, because now we're free of blood ties and cultures, and we can be anybody who we need to be. But then there is this, through that keyhole, my intuition is, there's a whole world on the other side of that we have yet to explore. And I don't know what quite that means, but I think artists, designers, creative thinkers, that space right after you wake up, before the machine in the mind starts. We have these moments in our lives that are truly free. And I want to explore this with the design and the art and the social change community to see what that means for our social systems. How can we intervene to bring that space in and to bring that reality in and grow a new society, not as a solution or even as a blueprint, but organically. I think something in like that is enabling the tissues of society to heal. I don't really have a huge idea on that, but that's what I'm seeing in my work and what I really want to work on.
That, by the way, was an offer for an opportunity for designers and creative people
Yes.
to get involved in this.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're only like at the beginning of this
We're only
conversation.
beginning.
And like all of these conversations we're already way past due. It's
but
time.
I have an idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a very good word yet, but I want to encourage interventionators.
Great. Great.
Wow.
You are now all charged to be.
So that's for Sarah. Sarah, I don't know where you are, but our project, I just thought of that in the bathroom this morning.
Right on.
It's got to be a better
In the
name.
bathroom this morning. Okay.
Yeah. That's
So-
what it happens, in the shower. It's like,
Exactly.
that's it, okay.
That's where
Well,
all the
I'm
best
sure it
stuff
can be improved, but it's not an incubator for plans or solutions. It's a place to get to that spark or that inviolable place that we all share as a resource.
Yeah, and
So-
we have to wrap up,
Yeah.
right? But I'm going to wrap up, if that's okay. I just wanted to say that when we interviewed all the speakers and we interviewed Jeff, there was something that really resonated on so many levels. And if you get a chance over lunch, because that's what we're breaking to do, and you can find time, you really do want to spend time with him. There's just so much here. And he really is at the cusp of what we're just starting to look at, a lot of us. So thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.